Hi everyone, it's Ash from FPL Hints, here to react to the revealed FPL 24-25 prices and the impact that they'll have, as well as the implications to FPL managers. As always, if you're able to like, share and subscribe, that will be greatly appreciated. Talking of which, we've seen a massive surge in views during this pre-season, but I've noticed that less than 1 in 10 of you have subscribed. So if you can hit that bell button, that will be greatly appreciated. And talking of which, before we get into the actual price review, one thing that is on the mind of many FPL managers is when FPL will go live. I've made a specific video for this. Link will be in the description below. And I can confirm, based on the calculations that we've done, looking at past data, looking at signs, that the broad prediction that was made is correct, and the specific prediction that I made also appears to be correct. I'm not going to confirm what that date and time was. You've got to click on the link in the description below, and then you'll know what that is as well. And just for context, last year I confirmed the date, got the time marginally wrong. Again, it's almost like a needle in a haystack in some respects, but fairly confident that, give or take by a day or two, that this year's prediction should be fairly spot on. So be sure to check out that video. I know that you're all thinking about it, and I've made the video just to address some common questions, and hopefully you don't have to book an entire week off worrying about when the game will go live or having to just make up meetings for that day itself. So the signs, have more or less appeared. The game will go live imminently, and yeah, just check out that video. So we'll jump straight into the prices, and I'm not going to review every single player price, but I'm going to look at the main ones, and I'll draw upon what appear to be some massive implications. And as we can see there on screen, Haaland's price is 15 million, which is an FPL record. There's no other player that's been priced at that amount, and this will clearly have an impact on how we play FPL this season. The headline that I want to give you is as follows: that you could have them all in FPL 23-24. You can't have them all in FPL 24-25. And that's based on the other price reveals that we'll talk about in a moment as well. And for many FPL content creators, this is a problem because it basically means that the template is harder to get to. It will take time. You've got to go the old-fashioned way, build up team value. Again, make sure that you jump on the right bandwagons early on. And those implications are such that you can't just shoehorn all of the premium players. That was one of the problems I felt was wrong with FPL last season, whereby there were some players who clearly were underpriced. And it kind of made me believe that maybe FPL Towers deliberately underpriced some players last season. Of course, Haaland was 14 million, and rightly so. But there are many others like Saka, 8.5, and many on that line where they could have been at least 500,000 or 1 million more, and they weren't. So with Haaland going 15 million up, initially I was thinking maybe they've reduced the prices of other premium players, and I can assure you it doesn't seem to be the case. But I also wanted to just bring some history in as well, that again, a lot of people are worrying about Haaland being 15 million and then the other players as well. But we had a time 10, 11 years ago, specifically this was the 11-12 season, as you can see on screen there, where you had plenty of players that were 12 million pounds, your Lampards, Fabregas, Rooney, Tevez, Van Persie, and no one would bat an eyelid at it. And you couldn't have them all because of that price. And of course, further down, you had the likes of Gerrard at 11 million, Van der Vaart at 10, even Ashley Young, who is still active as an FPL player. Back then, he was 10 million pounds playing for Manchester United. And even Charlie Adam, because of his sensational Blackpool season during the 10-11 season, he was 9 million pounds. So, of course, Javier Hernandez, Chicharito, you can see there, £10 million as well. And of course, Andy Carroll, who had that sensational half season with Newcastle, moved to Liverpool, priced at £10 million. There's a lot of players here that we can see that had a very expensive price tag. And in the traditional FPL format, especially in previous seasons, it was harder to get to the template from the get-go. Whereas last season, with the way that the prices were, you could pretty much get to the template from pre-season game week 1. And that basically meant there wasn't a lot of variation. And for some managers, especially myself, I found it very difficult to progress up the ranks purely because at a baseline level, we all had the same team. And the implications of FPL going back to its roots with multiple premium price players is that you really have to think about your decisions. There'll be a lot of 50-50 calls that we're making that we weren't making during the 13-14 season. And I feel that's a good thing. And it basically makes the game more fun. And perhaps there'll be certain FPL managers who ordinarily would play in a boring way that have to take more risks than they ordinarily would. And I feel that's a good thing. So just wanted to touch upon the fact that, of course, Haaland was 15 million. And then it made you think, how does that compare with other players? So we can see there some of Chelsea's players. The big one is Palmer, because FPL.team, who just give a shout out to them as well. Of course, for those that have been following my preseason videos, I was using their tool, and the pricing that they had for Palmer was 9.5 million. But in the case of Palmer, they've bumped him up to 10.5 million. And that's significant because automatically, with his price and Haaland's price, you add them up, that's 25.5 million of your £100 million budget. Now, just a quick segue here. FPL did talk about possibly changing the rules ahead of the 24-25 season. And if they've really increased the budget by 5 million, then I guess we go back to the drawing board and the template would be easy to get to, but I doubt it. I'm going on the basis that the budget remains at 100 million pounds, and 10.5 million for Palmer is something that many would certainly consider, especially with him being on penalties and the amount of goal involvements he had for Chelsea. But then you look at the other options. Of course, Jackson, who had a mixed season. You got Sterling at 7 million, James, Mr. Injury Prone, at 5. But you got Nkunku as well at 6.5 million, who of course had an injury hit season. And if he's fit and ready to go, and then you've got Palmer, and of course, Palmer's got penalties, but then are you willing to pay that extra 4 million for Palmer when you can get Nkunku? And of course, some might just go for both, but that's something that is really going to give a lot of managers food for thought. Which players are going to give you value for money? That points per million metric that many FPL managers overlook time and time again is something that's going to become very important. So just keep that in mind as well. So with Chelsea, I think Palmer's price absolutely fair, 10.5 million. And then Kunku, my thinking right now is I'd want Haaland in my team just so that with Man City, you know what their prowess is. Haaland also hasn't featured in the Euros because Norway didn't qualify. And then if I was going to pick a Chelsea asset, I've got to really give Nkunku some consideration just due to his capabilities and also the fact that he's 4 million less than Palmer. Now, onto another player onto flag, Ivan Toney, £7.5 million. And we know that with him and his pedigree for Brentford, a lot of speculation that he won't be at Brentford for the 24-25 season. And there's very strong talk of him potentially moving to a Champions League club within the Premier League. And if that is the case, and he's a regular starter at 7.5 million, I think he'd be an absolute no-nonsense pick as well. So just keep a lookout for that. And I think that's a very fair and generous price for a Premier League footballer that is more than likely to score 15 or more goals next season wherever he goes. So again, we looked at the top end with Haaland at £15 million, but then you've got players who aren't going to score that many goals, who are priced in a, again, he could easily be 8.5 million, but 7.5 gives you some consideration as well. That FPL is saying, okay, these are the premium players, but then those that may not have that price tag may cost half the price. That you've got to think about them as well. Which brings me on to Mateta, who had a fantastic second half of the season under the new manager at Crystal Palace, 7.5 million. I've talked about in my preseason videos that he was my go-to pick in the first draft, in my second draft, but then in my final draft, I took him out because of the Olympic football considerations for France, and he's in the squad, and that final tournament doesn't finish until a week before game week 1. So just had to take him out for the time being. And of course, Elise has gone to Bayern Munich as well. So who knows how effective that Palace attack will be and how impactful the replacement will be as well. But 7.5 million, you can't really go wrong with Mateta. I think it's about 5.5 million last season. So fair play to that. That brings me on to another £7.5 million player, Anthony Gordon. Absolutely sensational at home in the Premier League last season. Again, very fair price, a generous price. And with Newcastle's opening run of games, I've got no doubt that many will consider him as well. Which brings me on to Bruno Fernandes. We've talked about a lot of players' prices increasing. In this case, £8.5 million, same as last year. Of course, integral with respect to his creativity in the team, his goal involvement prowess, but also his ex-mins. Absolutely fair price. So in this instance, we've talked about how some premium players have obviously had their prices increased massively due to the amount of goal involvements they got in 23-24. But in this case, they've just kept it as it is and can't complain to that. Which brings me on to Mohamed Salah. And again, can't say that the 23-24 season was his most vintage season. Of course, he had AFCON, picked up a few injuries here and there as well. But at £12.5 million, when you've got Haaland at 15 million and you've got Cole Palmer at 10.5 million, that's £38 million on those three premium players. And then let's just say you wanted to get those players in, and then you've got 62 million in the bank, and then you want to buy an additional 12 players. That's 5.1 million. Let's just call it 5 million. Is that really worth it? I don't think it is, because you're really going to have a lopsided team, almost like a Ferrari front, and then you've got like a banger of a back, as it were. So again, with Mohamed Salah, I've got no doubt, because of Liverpool's opening fixtures, many will go for him. New manager also adds an unknown quantity as well. But of course, Mohamed Salah is a proven player in the Premier League, and with him, I've got no doubt that many will opt for him. But the question is, can you have Haaland, Palmer, and Salah and have a balanced team? I don't think you can. Can you have Haaland and Palmer and a balanced team without Mohamed Salah? I think you can. Can you have Haaland and Salah? That's a question I was asked a lot in my preseason videos, and I haven't actually produced a draft with both in my draft. And if I did, I'd need to find an extra million, obviously, because Haaland's price has gone up by the extra million. So it's something that I'll probably attempt in my official first draft once the game launches next week. But it's a tough one. It just doesn't feel right spending more than a quarter of your budget on Mohamed Salah and Haaland. And then it brings you on to the next question of, can Trent Alexander-Arnold cover not having Salah? Can Diaz cover you for not having Salah as well? So just questions that you need to factor in. But clearly, the template has well and truly been smashed. We're all going to basically start from scratch and have to make our own decisions. And I think that's a really great way to start the 24-25 season. In addition to the rule changes that have been speculated on by FPL as well, I think it'll just add a further variation and just make the game that more fun and interesting. That brings me on to my next player, Kai Havertz, who, again, just shout out to FPL.team. They predicted that he would cost £8 million and that he'd be reclassified as a forward, and clearly that was almost inevitably going to be the case with the way that he was positioned for Arsenal in the 23-24 season. I think he's an absolute bargain at £8 million, but then many FPL managers might be put off from getting him because effectively being reclassified, even though technically that is the right reclassification, that he's going to get less points for goals. He won't get that clean sheet anymore if Arsenal keep a clean sheet. So if he was to replicate the same amount of goal involvements, same amount of bonus points, he would score less points in 24-25 than he did in 23-24. But if Saka, which no doubt will be significantly more expensive, and Odegaard, I'd be surprised if he is 8 million or less, that Havertz is a great way into the Arsenal attack without having to break your bank. Champions League team, you can't go wrong. And I guess talking of forwards and like the template, as it were, again, I talked about like the template potentially being smashed, but I think the go-to forwards for many, Havertz, Isak, and Haaland, I think that would be very popular for pre-season, and many might even lock that in for game week 1. Again, just consider like the Euros as well. England having got into the advanced stages, some of those England players might get an additional rest. Isak, Haaland didn't play in the Euros. Havertz obviously exited at the quarterfinal stage. So just keep that in mind as well. I think Ollie Watkins would also be a very popular pick, but then if he's going to get the extra rest after the Euros final, then I think some might get put off from buying him initially. Having said all of that, with all those midfielders and attackers, we've not really covered defenders. I kind of feel that with the price reveals, primarily they've been like the popular players, midfielders, and the attackers. But this one was quite telling. You've got Taylor Harwood-Bellis for Southampton, who was a regular for them, and he's £4 million. Whereby, again, we're talking about like FPL from previous years. A 4.0 would be someone who'd be a non-starter or someone who'd only pick up a few games here and there. So maybe FPL do recognize that, yes, we've hiked up the premium players to some degree. We've been reasonable with the more moderately priced players, but then with these budget players, some who may not have any considerations for FPL managers, apart from fodder, that they will be factored in. I feel that just on the pricing alone, that you've got a 4.0 million player here, and there's also like 4.5s as well. You've got Ricardo Pereira, 4.5 million, and has prowess in the Premier League. But then you've also got like Champions League players like Konsa, who's 4.5 million as well. And you've also got Gahey, Crystal Palace, England player, just like Konsa, £4.5 million. I kind of feel that one of the trends we're going to see is that because it's harder to have a heavy attack, that the 4.5 million players will be very popular in defence. You might get one premium defender, like some will have a Trent in their team or an Arsenal defender, but they'll no doubt opt for perhaps two 4.0s, two 4.5s, and that premium defender. And the fact that you've got so many of them makes you think, and it adds variation to the game as well. So again, I said I don't want to go full on heavy into every single price. Goalkeepers seemed fairly standard. I think you had Pickford and Leno, with the number of clean sheets they've had, 5 million, fair price as well. Gone are the days when Joe Hart was £7 million. So, like, in a nutshell, what FPL have done is they've gone old school with the premium players being relatively expensive, and they've not gone heavy on the defense. They kind of like have said, premium players, we want to make you think. On the defense, okay, you've got some leeway. And then on the reasonable price players, that there's also some leeway there. So I think it's an improvement at the very least from last season, where a lot of so-called premium players didn't have a double-digit price tag. So I think that is fair, and it's going to open up the game in different ways. Talking of which, preseason guide for the 24-25 season. I've been compiling a guide from literally the end of May. I'll put a link in the description below, which shows you all of my preseason planning, look at the drafts I've made, and many other useful videos. So feel free to check that out. And there you have it. That is my review, as well as the implications for FPL managers during the 24-25 season. Clearly, to get a balanced team will be very hard, and you really need to work your way to the template this time around. It's a good thing, and maybe some of us boring safety based FPL managers will take considerably more risks than we did in 23-24. Let me know in the comments below what you think about the pricing, what strategies you're going to deploy, and if you feel that this is something for the better or the worse in FPL. Take care and all the best.